Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. I do appreciate you joining me here on Now TV every Friday morning. It's always a joy to be with you. I love sharing what I believe to be the truth of God's Word with you. I appreciate the fact that more and more of you are tuning in on YouTube and watching these videos. Now, as I've suggested to you before, the viewership on YouTube is just an infinitesimally small fraction or indication of the wider audience. Now TV has a potential, and keyword potential obviously, a potential audience in the hundreds of millions of people. So I literally have no way of knowing how many people are actually tuning in and watching every Friday morning as I share with you here on Morning Musings. So, again, I just want to thank you so very, very much. Well, here we are, the second week into the year 2022. The last year has been, how do we describe the previous year? To say it's been a roller coaster is an understatement. To say that it's been traumatic in many ways is an understatement. And what we have seen on so many fronts is a violation of the public trust in our elected officials. We continue to see corruption. We continue to see immorality. We continue to see blatant lies being told to us, not only in America, but around the world, as governments try to exert more and more and more control over the lives of individuals. It is truly appalling. Now, here's the good thing about this, all right? The good thing about it, ladies and gentlemen, is, number one, we're not living in the biblical last days. Which means, guess what? The end of time, the end of the world, is not right around the corner and not destined to occur in this generation. I have to tell you, I have one bookshelf. It's in another room right here. And that bookshelf is essentially dedicated to books that have been written just within my own personal experience, my own personal lifetime, by so-called prophecy experts telling us, the end will be in this generation. Do you remember the book, 88 Reasons Why the Rapture Will Be in 1988 by Edgar Whisenant? Listen, that little book sold millions of copies. Millions of copies. Well, I don't have to tell you the rapture. The end of the age did not happen in 1988. So what happens? Well, Mr. Edgar Whisenant kind of dropped back 10 yards. Said he was devastated by the fact that it did not occur. But he was absolutely positive that his figures were, still 99% complete. So what does he do? He announces to the world, I found a 1-year mistake in my calculations. So, 89 reasons why the rapture will be in 1989. And it sold millions of copies. Well, once again, I don't have to tell you the rapture, the end of the age, did not occur in 1989. So what did Mr. Whisenant do? He essentially took his millions of dollars gleaned from the sale of his fraudulent books, his false books, and disappeared over the horizon, not to be heard of again. And some years ago, and look, I could magnify, I could multiply stories like this, but I'll only tell you one more. Some years ago, I got an email one day from this gentleman, obviously zealous, obviously convinced, and he was saying the rapture will occur in September 2015. Went on to say, if the Bible is inspired, if the Bible is the Word of God, the rapture will be September 2015, without any doubt whatsoever. World War III will break out. The Great Tribulation, the abomination of desolation, Daniel 9 will be fulfilled September 2015. I sent this gentleman an email, and I tried to be as kind and respectful as I possibly could. And I said, well, sir, with all due respect, your predictions are absolutely false. The rapture will not occur. The Great Tribulation, the abomination of desolation, the fulfillment of Daniel 9 will not take place September 2015. And I said, so that's my prediction. And I said, now I want to issue a challenge to you, a very respectful, very kind challenge to you. When September 2015 comes and goes, and the rapture has not occurred, World War III has not broken out. Look, anybody could predict the possibility of a World War III. You don't have to have any prophetic insight. You don't have to study the Bible whatsoever to say, hey, pardon me, World War III could break out. You don't have to repeat, you don't have to be talking about Bible prophecy to make that kind of a prediction. So anyway, I said, now, when your prediction comes and goes, the time of your prediction, and nothing happens, not one thing that you are predicting comes to pass, then please get a hold of me. Let's study the Bible together, because here's my position. I went to Daniel 9, did an exegesis. I shared a host of scriptures in which Jesus and his apostles said that the end was to be in the first century. And I said, with all due respect, you are violating the inspired text. It is not a question of whether or not the Bible is inspired as to whether or not the rapture will be in September 2015. The question is, if the Bible is inspired, then the end came in AD 70. So please, get back with me when your predictions fail. Well, September 2015 came and went. October 2015 came and went. November 2015, December 2015. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to give more than sufficient time, okay, because I knew that he was making his prediction based upon the Jewish feast days and his misunderstanding of the Jewish feast days. So I knew that by December 2015, he had no more room on in the festal calendar for fulfillment. So guess what? I drug out his email, which I still have, and sent him an email, and I said, I'm not trying to be cautious, caustic. I'm not trying to be unkind at all. But if you'll remember, I sent you the following email. I copied and pasted my email. And I said, your prediction has failed. Will you now please study with me? Will you now please consider that Jesus and his apostles made the prediction, the end of the age, the judgment, the resurrection was going to happen in the first century. Now, will you study with me? He wrote back in a very nice email, and he said, well, you are accurate, you are true. My prediction failed, and he said, quite honestly, I am devastated. I just knew that I had everything worked out. He said, so I'm in the process of recalculating. And he said, I thank you for your kind offer to study, but he said, I'm going to decline. Wait a minute. Recalculating to put the end off even further in our future and ignore what the Bible said about when the end was to occur. Ladies and gentlemen, over the last 2 years plus, I've been sharing with you the challenge of Christ. The words of Jesus, the words of his apostles are absolutely unequivocal. They are undeniable. They are explicit. The end of the age, the judgment, the resurrection, the coming of the Lord, the new creation were all to come in the first century. We cannot wave our hand and say, as one person on YouTube did just the other day, saying, well, one day is with the Lord 1,000 years, so that means that we are in day 2 of God's countdown. Ladies and gentlemen, it does not say a day with the Lord is 1,000 years. That is a perversion of the language of 2 Peter 3. Instead of saying a day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, which, by the way, they conveniently ignore the rest of it, and 1,000 years is as a day, it is a metaphor. It doesn't say one day is 1,000 years. Let me reiterate, that is a perversion of the text. So, I've said all of that in order to bring us back to the reality that it's time for the church, broadly considered, to honor the words of Jesus, to honor the challenge of Christ. So we come back to the question, is there a gap between the 69th and the 70th week of Daniel chapter 9? I have shared with you that Thomas Ice, prominent dispensationalist, says there is in fact a 2,000-year gap in the text of Daniel chapter 9. And my question is, where is that gap stated? There is nowhere in Daniel 9, 24 through 27 that says after the 69th week Messiah will cut off and the countdown will be suspended. Nowhere is there a suggested gap, an implied gap, a necessary gap. To insert a 2,000-year gap into the text of Daniel chapter 9 demands, listen to me carefully, ladies and gentlemen, please catch the power of this. To insert a 2,000-year gap between the 69th and the 70th week demands that you have some kind of linguistic, verbal, and textual indication of that gap. You can't just say, as Thomas Ice does, oh, yeah, there's a gap. Well, where is it? Let me reiterate. There is no statement, there is no implication of the death of Messiah delaying anything. Ladies and gentlemen, the death of Messiah is part of the countdown. Now, if the death of Messiah is part of the 70-week countdown, are you listening? If the death of Messiah is part of the countdown, then the death of Messiah did not delay or postpone or reschedule the countdown. It's part of it. And that fact alone completely, utterly, 100% destroys the dispensational paradigm. Let me encourage you. Just let me encourage you. Let me challenge you even. Get out your Bible. Turn to Daniel chapter 9, 24 to 27. and find the words postponement, delay, suspension, or anything. Now, I understand, listen to me very carefully. I understand that there is such a thing as a logical fallacy. Now, what's a logical fallacy? Well, a logical fallacy is arguing, to paraphrase, if it's not there, it ain't there, okay? So, I'm not saying and I'm not suggesting that simply because the word postponement, delay, suspension, recalculation, I'm not suggesting that because one of those exact precise words are not found in Daniel 9, that the idea could not be there, okay? What I am saying is they are not there, so that suggests to us, since the words delay, postponement, reschedule, etc., since none of those words are there, we must be able to produce the contextual evidence that demands that there is a gap between the 69th and the 70th week. We must find textual, verbal, linguistic, contextual evidence that says this death of Messiah did in fact postpone something. But let me reiterate this, ladies and gentlemen. This is absolutely, incredibly, foundationally important. Since the death of Messiah, the cutting off of Messiah, and by the way, let me point this out very quickly. Dispensationalists have now stooped to the level, and I'm not talking about the everyday, ordinary, pew-packing dispensationalists, but the men who are supposed to be scholars. They have now resorted to retranslating Daniel 9 to tell us that in the midst of the week, Messiah would be cut off, and whereas the text does not say this, they are now, some of them, the more brazen ones, are saying, and have nothing for himself. Meaning, we are told, he could not establish the kingdom because he was killed. Do you see how brazen that is, ladies and gentlemen? To completely retranslate the text. It's utterly amazing. So, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to Daniel chapter 9, and I want you to read it at least 3 or 4 times, maybe 5 times. And look for not only the words of postponement, etc., which you're not going to find, but look for the language of postponement. Not the word, but the language. Find the suggestion, find the implication, and don't rely on the dispensational translation. Read the text in a variety of translations and see if you find any hint, any clue, any suggestion, any shadow of an idea of a postponement, of a delay, of a failure of Messiah to do what he came to do. Now then, last week, I left you by introducing chart number 6 in a series of charts that, by the way, in my revised 2021 book, this is like its 3rd or 4th revision. But the book is entitled Seal Up Vision and Prophecy. The word up is not in the Hebrew or even the Greek, the Septuagint, but it's in a lot of translations, so I went ahead and included it. So the charts that I'm sharing with you are in my book. And again, it was revised and upgraded and expanded in 2021, and it's now available. Now, don't forget, for the rest of January 2022, on U.S. orders only, on all orders over $25 or more, you will receive a 15% discount plus free shipping. Now, that's going to save you right at 20%, ladies and gentlemen. That's incredible. That's fantastic. So, for the rest of January 2022, go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com. Pick out enough books, enough material to make it $25 or more, okay? And you will receive a 15% discount plus free shipping. But for those of you who have asked, where can we find these charts? The charts are in Seal Up Vision and Prophecy. Now, last week I introduced the very first element of chart number 6. Let me read that to you again. If there is a gap in the text of Daniel chapter 9, if there is a gap of so far 2,000 years, then the establishment of the kingdom in the first century would have altered God's plan. Because you see, God's plan was 70 weeks are determined to establish the kingdom, to summarize it, state it succinctly. But by all calculations, the 70-week countdown brings us to the first century. It brings us to Jesus saying, the time is fulfilled. And as F.F. Bruce stated in his excellent little book, The Time is Fulfilled, he observes Jesus' statement, the time is fulfilled, demands that there are some prophecies, or at least a prophecy, in the Old Testament that set the time for the kingdom. And Jesus is now saying that predicted, that prophesied, that anticipated time has now arrived. So, since Daniel chapter 9 set the time for the establishment of the kingdom, i.e. the first century, and by the way, since Daniel chapter 2, and since Daniel chapter 7, pardon me, and since Daniel chapter 12, all posit the time of the kingdom, the time of the end, and the time of the resurrection as the first century in the days of the Roman Empire, then that means that since Jesus said the appointed time has come, then if there's a gap of so far 2,000 years between the time of Jesus stating the time is fulfilled, the time which was the time of Daniel chapter 9, the time of Daniel 2, the time of Daniel 7, the time of the end of Daniel 12. Since all of those time frames bring us right squarely down to the first century, then if there is in fact a 2,000-year gap between that time and the actual establishment of the kingdom, then guess what, ladies and gentlemen? That means that God altered his plan. Because if the time was right 2,000 years ago, supposedly, but if there's actually a 2,000-year gap between the time is fulfilled, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. If there's actually a 2,000-year gap, then guess what? Then the prophecy of Daniel 9 was altered. It was changed. Because the prophecy of Daniel 9, remember, brings us to the first century. The prophecy of Daniel 9 doesn't bring us to the 21st century. The 70 weeks cannot be extrapolated 2,000 years. All dispensationalists admit that the 483 years brings us to the first century, which is when Jesus said the time is fulfilled. Now, let me point something out to you, ladies and gentlemen, to go back to Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel chapter 12. In Daniel 2 and Daniel chapter 7, there are 4 kingdoms, which brings us to the days of the Roman Empire. Now look, I'm well aware of the fact that dispensationalists say, well, yes, Jesus came during the time of the Roman Empire. According to Luke chapter 3, during the days of Augustus Caesar, a decree went out that all the world should be taxed. Okay, that's during the days of the Roman Empire. That's the days of the 4th empire of Daniel chapter 2. That's the days of the 4th empire of Daniel chapter 7. So the countdown brings us right there. So we have Daniel 2, Daniel 7, predicting the time of, and listen to me, the time of not only the days of the Roman Empire, but the days of the establishment of the king. In the days of those kings. What kings? The days of the Roman Empire. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven shall set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And it shall smash and destroy, crush all of these previous kingdoms. Okay. So the countdown is right, i.e. the Roman Empire. So now, the dispensationalists say, well, the kingdom was not established in the 1st century in the days of the Roman Empire. So what do we have to do? We have to conjure up, we have to literally invent a doctrine of the revived Roman Empire. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, I would encourage you, go back to Daniel 2, go back to Daniel 7, go to Daniel chapter 12, and see if you find any reference to a revived Roman Empire, a restoration of Rome in the last days. I can assure you, you will not find that. Well, I'm out of time. I will see you next week.